Welcome to unDUBBED, where we're unscripted, uncensored, and undeniably data. There's no fluff filters. It's where Sarah and I talk about real data, decisions, and the digital world. Today, we're continuing our series of What Makes It Great, and we're diving into something that can make or break decisions faster than you can say dashboard fatigue. What makes a great data visualization? Is it colors, the charts, or the storytellers? Or maybe it's about what you don't show. Let's cut through the noise and find out. Let's get unDUBBED. Sarah, welcome to another potty. Excited to have you here and get back into our series. I thought we'd start out with a question that's a little bit looser. So we've all seen those dashboards that look like a data explosion, where there's so many great numbers and so little clarity. Why don't you tell me what actually makes a great data visualization?
Great question, because I think we can spend hours on what makes a really bad visualization. So let's spin it around what makes a great visualization. You were talking around clutter. Now, there's a lot of things we can do to remove clutter. And I would say 90% of the problems I see with dashboards is in clutter. It's like a visual overload. I call it walking into the chemist warehouse over going into an Apple store. I find it so overwhelming. There's stuff everywhere. Walk into a beautiful Apple store and I feel very at peace. So that's how I feel dashboards should be. So when you're looking at what makes a great data visualization, some of the key elements for me is everything on the page, does it really need to be there?
And how do you get to that?
Well, I think in the past, we would build a dashboard to rule the world. It was a dashboard for everybody. You know those old dashboards, or we'd been just trying to showcase what we could do with a dashboard, how much data we had. So people's idea was like, let's just throw as much stuff on a dashboard as we humanly possibly can. But for me, I like to really think about who the intended audience is for the dashboard, and also understand why this dashboard is being produced. And I think if you've got that in mind, you can really start to remove all the unnecessary charts, maybe subtext, additional lines of information, a whole lot of tables.
100%. And I love the analogy of walking into the chemist warehouse versus the Apple store. So if anyone's tuning in from overseas, chemist warehouse is a drugstore on steroids. So it's floor to ceiling, whether it's vitamins, Band-Aids, and it's just color everywhere. And it's like an assault on your virtual senses. So I know exactly what Sarah's talking about there. And I do feel the same way as well about when you've got so much information in a dashboard that really can turn people off. So I totally agree that it's important to be able to understand the audience. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you've got an audience, let's say, of 400 or 500 people for one particular dashboard, and maybe they come at things with different requirements or different points of view around what needs to be shown or how it needs to be shown? And what have you done in that respect?
Yeah, really great question. Some of the dashboards that my team has built in the past has gone out to cast of thousands. And that is really difficult when you're trying to get the information across, and understanding that some people are more visual and other people are more tabular based. So what I like to do is really come back to that why the dashboard's being delivered and start with the insights. And something that I know you and I are both favourites of is big as numbers, also known as bands, and you can also replace the as with something else if you like to. Having those big call out numbers across the top, then using the tools functionality to be able to either click into those numbers to see more information, or at least show the key information in the next area. That is a good way to get that communication out across many people and let them almost do a bit of their own self-discovery on what's important for them to then go and dig deeper.
I've definitely had situations where I've been rolling out large visualizations across big organizations as well. And in fact, there was 4 distinct groups. There were the management or leadership team, and then there were franchisees, licensees, and then the employees of the organization as well. And so franchisees are really their own small business people. So they've got very different ways of thinking about things. The licensees I found weren't as complex in what their business requirements were. And then employees sigh and just get on with it because this is what corporate's telling me to do. And where I felt that I might have gone wrong in some of the delivery, at least in the initial stages, was not engaging with each type of stakeholder. Even though they were all supposed to have one product to rule it all, having different needs, I could have potentially better represented it or explained things along the way. So it became quite tricky in terms of the change management behind it. So I think even though everyone had a central why, they needed to understand how they were performing relative to one another and relative to benchmark businesses that were the same size as them. It really did have a different flavor of what needed to happen, requirements and understanding who you're developing for, and acknowledging, especially when there's a large audience, that might be quite complex. You have to make some decisions. It's never a good idea to try and solve for everyone in the one space. You might have the need for additional dashboards or workbooks that are separate from the delivery that you're doing to satisfy those needs that are superfluous for other people but critical for some of the stakeholders.
I really like that layering approach. So you can come in with your insights and your bands and any kind of key graphical information that you need, and then drill down. Because like you said, you've got some people that really want to get into the weeds, other people that probably want to look at historical trends. I like the way when you start up at the top and you've got that strategic outlook that is the company's key KPIs that everyone's working towards, and then allowing that flexibility to go down and look into what's important to you based on your persona. I quite like in the band as having a small, almost like sparkline trend that supports that band, and sometimes that can come just above it.
Yeah, I've seen it happen just above it or even just below it as well. Also bar charts as supplementary, especially when you've got the bands coming down the left-hand side. I've seen some beautiful bands include the bar charts there as well. Have you ever heard of a mini band?
I can visualize what it looks like. Is that kind of when you've got maybe more than 5 going on, or?
Good guess, but no. It's actually having a band further down the page within charts. Pretend that you've got an area on your dashboard where there's a chart, but you also want to have some associated bands with that chart, but it's much further down in your long form, not having it the same size as your typical band, but still a bit of a call out. So it's easy to understand. So you can see it's all tied together, and it sort of ties off that story if you've got a real long lot of information to get through, rather than just having the bands at the top or down the side. The mini bands I've seen can be quite effective. But to your point, I really believe in consistency. Bands should be top or left. I don't really want to see them everywhere.
Another important factor when we're using bands is to make sure they tell us something. If revenue is $40 billion this year, is that good or is that bad? It's understanding the context behind that. So what are some of the key things that you do in that band area, Fee, to really highlight what the outcome is?
Right. So I love your comment before around sparklines, because the sparklines can give you the perspective of how's this comparing over time, over the last 12 months. There's also some great indicators that you can use, a upwards triangle versus downwards triangle, or using some color in that as well to really help to highlight or punctuate what's happening. If you're using a typical rag, you may want to double encode like that using both the green and the red. There are ways, beautiful ways, that you can actually have a colorblind safe rag as well, whether or not you're using something like a navy and an orange, or if you're using different saturation of the colors, red and the green, it can actually show up as well. So the double encoding, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? Or is it versus target? Really comes back to what the requirements are of the visualization. Some good bands chat going on.
So Fee, what else is important when you think of bands?
I always challenge people when they come to me with a dashboard that doesn't have bands. And the question I have is, what's the most important thing about this page? What is the thing that you're trying to communicate on this page? And so I believe that 98% of the time you should be having bands. I think if there's something like a table dashboard where you've got all of the data in one place, it's likely that someone wants to export the data somewhere else. Is it necessary to have the bands then? I don't think so. So there are times at which bands aren't important, but I would, really challenge people to think, if I'm putting a dashboard together and there's nothing that's important on this page, why am I putting the dashboard together?
Yeah, really good takeaway there, Fee. Fee, you touched a little bit on accessibility. I think it's a really important one.
It's really important for fonts to be legible. And so I typically go with the Tableau designed fonts when I'm designing for Tableau, because I know that they'll render properly on the server or in the cloud environment. It is important, though, to ensure that you have the right size, that you have consistency in the way that it's written as well. So one thing that people may not be aware of is that some people with disabilities find it difficult to read text when it's all in capitals. And I know that in some instances, people like to put titles or subtitles in all caps, but it's actually more difficult to read. And it's something to do with caps having less curvature in there, and that makes it more difficult. So there's more cognitive load to actually go and read. So in terms of typography, I would just be aware of the case that you're using. I'm not saying completely avoid caps. I'm just saying when you use caps, make sure that you're fully aware of it.
Really good thoughts there, Fee. Do you have a minimum size font that you would put on a dashboard? And when would you not adhere to that?
Well, I love consistency in my workbooks, and design's really important to me. So I sit on the Apple side of the fence rather than the Chemist Warehouse side of the fence. I avoid an 8-point or 9-point, and the minimum I have is a 10-point, which I'll use on the axes. You really need to make sure that the color of text that you're using has enough contrast in there as well. There's always an exception that can be made, but it really needs to be for a great reason, because people who are older will have difficulties sometimes in reading that smaller text. How about you?
I think there's cases when the dreaded, I need to print this, comes out, and you've got a bar chart and they're like, oh, I'm going to need all the bars are going to have the number on the top. And you can put in 12 font and you're trying to go in 12 font, but without it really overcrowding your dashboard, you're a little bit stuck. So there are the odd example where it is, in my mind, more secondary information. So you've called out maybe in the band what the current revenue is for the year and maybe even the month, but you've got some supplementary information there. But like you said, you are going to start, restricting people that aren't going to be able to read that as much. The reason I say it's secondary, because in this case, I would highly recommend having your y-axes clearly labeled and potentially having guidelines so people can estimate what those values are regardless.
Guidelines, they're really interesting because I typically take them off. I find them to be the chart clutter. Understood though, if you're going to be printing out, it can be really helpful because you don't have the ability to wave your mouse over and just pick it up quite quickly what the actual number is in a tooltip. So what other design elements do you think makes a visualization or dashboard great?
Consistency. So having your titles all in a consistent color, size, font, your subtitles, your legends, your, X and Y axes labels, your tooltips. Then, of course, you've got the whole gamut of coloring. What are your color palettes? How much color don't you use? You've got brand guidelines that are being built out by your marketing and UX teams. I would say typically they are not going to serve you completely for building out data visualizations.
Yes, I agree. Brand guidelines are never going to give you exactly what you need from a data visualization perspective. And even though they go a little way, sometimes things need to be different. So for instance, the typography that might be your regular typography and your brand guidelines might not be loaded or accessible on your server or cloud environment. Therefore, you may be better choosing the Tableau typography because that it's going to render properly and just make that carte blanche across your guidelines. Having delivered 3 sets of guidelines now, 2 in my previous role at JLL, 1 for DUBBED, it takes some work to get it there. But once it's there and you have the templates, it's much, much easier for you to be able to build the dashboards because you don't have to think about what's actually going on. The color is in a specific order of how you layer it on. It has been designed that way because the colors that are adjacent to each other have enough contrast. And therefore, if there is a color blindness perspective, like a color blindness issue, they've got different saturation levels that that they're going to show up differently. Color is really important, not vomiting up color on the page like you're a unicorn on LSD. If you've got a good design color palette, you can start off really neutral and start to layer on the colors. Thinking about the order that they come in, having a rubric behind it really helps in that space because if I have to make a choice and I've got 3 minutes to repair a dashboard and I can only choose one area, 9 times out of 10, it'll be me going and fixing the colors. In addition to the colors, thinking about things like size, so other pre-attentive attributes, so how thick are your bars? The more that you can remove, the better for your brain to then be able to assess quickly what it is that is actually occurring. That is the key, making sure that the dashboard is as simple as possible so that people are able to consume the information and they almost feel like, I knew this already. That's a real test for me when things are going really right. And the design people think, oh, I intuitively know. Yeah, that's because I've done a really good design in here to help you intuitively understand these things. White space, padding, really important.
And consistency and padding.
Yes, absolutely. So every element needs to be the same. At times when we add a legend in, for instance, it can throw things out. So really adjusting how the x-axis on the left is at the same level as the x-axis on the right. All of these little things that developers can do to really tweak how things are, it creates and builds trust in what the end user is actually seeing. The design elements, always having your filters in the same spot, always having the info in the same spot. So when the end user is coming in, you might have to teach them the first time, the second time, the 7th time, but eventually they're going to end up getting exactly how it comes together, and then they're going to become more comfortable in reading the work that you've put together, and they're more likely to adopt it. What other design elements do you think are important?
White space is a massive one, and that's going from your Chemist Warehouse to your Apple store. Historically, you would see a lot of overwhelm in dashboards, and just removing that clutter and giving space is so key. So I think that's a really great one that you've highlighted there. One thing that I want to dig into is in organizations, there's many people that are designing data visualizations. How do you ensure consistency?
Trying to get individuals to design like one another, it's a huge process to commit to. And it's really a organization that is committed to design, committed to getting the best products out there, that will implement a thing like visualization guidelines, will implement training to help their people to understand it, will implement coaching so they get one-to-one coaching on their visualizations, peer reviews as well to help people discuss, is this the best way to be doing things, creating some suggestions, getting some opinions that are better than the stakeholder opinions because they'll be more qualified and experienced in design as well. So it gives the developers some time to reconsider whether or not their design is really hitting the mark or how people may interpret what they've done. Because we have a bias where we've built it. Oh, that's simple. But when we get third parties to review it, so having that in place, really important. And I think just that top-down change management commitment, this is what we're doing in terms of having the style guide, implementing it, the reason why we're doing it, and recognition, consistency, a reduced effort. You and I recently did a proof of concept for a large global organization, the Green Climate Fund, which was really exciting. And we brought in another organization, MIP, and the data school to help us to deliver it. So there were 4 of us that were working for a week. We had 3 dashboards to deliver, and we had a whole bunch of data modeling to do at the same time. So one was assigned the data model, the rest of us were assigned doing the visualizations. And we came from different companies. So it wasn't like this is something that we do regularly. We were thrown together, and the requirements weren't clear until the middle of the week. We had limited time with the client. We would have an hour each day. And it wasn't until the Wednesday after the 3rd hour that we had a clear definition of what the requirements were so that we could go away. And we had until Friday. So 2 days of work to deliver something that was consistent. By having the guidelines and a checklist and some templates to work from, we managed to deliver something that was consistent across the 3 dashboards. It was tweaked to the GCF's brand, so they had their own color palette as well. We ensured that they had that trust in the data from that brand recognition, and we could build a lot faster as well. And without those guidelines, it would have been really difficult for us to ensure that we had something consistent, given that we only had 2 days to bring it all together.
Yeah, and they looked beautiful without that starting point style guide that we could all adhere to. It would have been every individual's creative input and then probably quite a mess to deal with on the last 2 days, which we didn't have the time for. So yeah, really great use case there of what a style guide can do. Something else we haven't talked about yet is around chart type.
Chart choices.
Something that always sticks in my mind is that a visualization should stand on its own. You're not going to be there to narrate over top of it. And every time I think that in the back of my head, I think, what chart type do I have to explain to people? And the 2 I don't is a bar chart and a line chart.
Agreed. And if you had to choose one?
Oh, it depends.
I agree. What do you think's the driver behind people choosing tricky charts?
I think a lot of it is just showcasing what they can do.
I agree. It's really difficult when you're in a role and your role is to do dashboard after dashboard and you want to get some variety. It's like eating the same breakfast every day. Eventually you're sick of that breakfast and you need to move on to something different. So we see people wanting to be creative in their chart choices. I suggest when you want to be creative, do a passion project rather than thinking about how do I introduce this into your business. Part of the reason someone can be viewed as a great designer is not about the design that they're actually doing, but around how many people are actually adopting that design, that usage and behavior. And I can guarantee you, if someone's introducing a Sankey into one of their workbooks for Joe Public, they're going to struggle with it, even though they're becoming a little more mainstream out there with what we see. It really gets into people who love data. Things like chord charts, really beautiful and a piece of art, but requires people to sit there and look, what's that point to that point? And it doesn't necessarily give you, it's more like art than information.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to add an extra type in there, and that's a heat map. I think heat maps are really good if you're looking at two different attributes. So maybe you've got a region down the side and you've got a particular product running across the top. If you want to really hone in quickly on which region and which product is doing the best, I think a heat map is a really great way of doing that.
I love it for day of week and time of day. Some of the activities that are going on, and then having the thing that you love to add, which is the bar chart. So a horizontal and a vertical bar chart on the top and the side. That gives that sort of context again really quickly. So I agree, heat maps are pretty cool, but you should be careful about when you're using them because the heat map is very rich in the color that you bring into a workbook. So it should be something where you know that there is going to be these hot spots that you really want to be able to highlight. So what are some visualizations that are on your beep list?
For me, and anyone that knows me, I'm going to start with the pie chart.
Does that include donuts too?
Yes, that's just a fancy pie chart.
It's a pie chart on Ozempic.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I am going to put a caveat in because there are some places where a pie/donut chart is okay. And for me, it's if you're comparing two things and two things only, and you can quickly identify based on a pie or donut chart which one is performing the other. When you go beyond two things, the human brain really struggles to figure out which piece of the pie or donut is bigger than the other.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Faye?
I avoid them. But people like non-data people love circles, so you'll often get asked for them. It's a bit of data fluency training for people and showing them, tell me what you see here. Asking some of those great questions that I know Andy Cotgrave used to do. What's the numbers? Guess the numbers of what you think it is, and doing that in comparison between two bars or two sections of a pie chart. You can quickly see that it's much more difficult to do it with a pie chart. You could do it if you sit there and look at it, but we know that people don't want to spend that much time. I'm with you. I also see people doing doughies just to add some flair. And I'm not someone that's about flair. I'm about practicality. I'm about clarity over complexity.
I think the other piece around a pie chart is you have to colour it all differently. If you've got 20 segments, you're going to have to throw 20 colours on that page, and that's going to overwhelm you. Whereas a nice simple bar or column chart, just put your highlight colour in.
It's a really important point. Being able to highlight and draw the attention to something is, again, a quick win in showing people where things are important on your dashboard. What about any other charts, maps? What's your thoughts?
Do you know how tiny Singapore is on a map? Malaysia? And then you want to compare it to India? That is very hard. And the amount of times I would walk into a room and they'd be like, we've built this, it's got a map, HR headcount on a map showing Singapore versus Malaysia versus India. Almost impossible.
I think that, like, from a design perspective and stakeholders, they're curious about maps because it's like, oh, look at my map. I recognize that. I'm familiar with the shape of Australia or Tasmania. It's, it's really easy for them to feel comfortable, and non-data people, when they're coming in to look at data, for me, I love it. I feel at home in it. And so, but when I see a map, like you say, because there's different sizes of countries, it can blow out or create bias in the way that we interpret the information. I don't mind the odd hex map.
Yes.
As a way to go around that. Or, if you need to, having just a lightly coloured map in the background with little dots and using size, etc., to do different elements of it. But I try to avoid as much as possible. So my question when there is a map on the page is this, is this map actually telling us anything?
Is it fluff?
Or is it fluff? Yeah.
And for those that don't know what a hex map is, the best example is probably looking at the states across America, where you've got Hawaii shoved down the bottom there and tiny, and you've got Alaska that's very big up the top. So using a hex to represent each state and putting them as close to where they are located as possible is actually a really nice visual way of showing America. Have you seen it in any other countries done well besides America?
I've seen them do it sometimes in Australia. So again, big landmass, right?
Any other chart types that you're just like, oh, why is that one being thrown up there?
We haven't talked about scatter plots, and I love a good scatter plot. If you're plotting two different measures, one against the other, really good to understand, is there any correlation going on? Where are the outliers? You can also layer on some colours for different groupings coming through in there, and again, that can show you interesting insights. A scatter used well is important. What else?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the scatter as well, in the right place.
Oh, tables. Where do tables sit in data visualization?
Oh, necessary evil.
Yeah, like I think my opinion has softened over the years. Give people what they need.
Where I turn my nose up at is when it's, 50 columns wide and thousands of rows long.
Agree, because it's definitely you're getting it from the wrong place then. But if it's supplementary to the visualizations that are going on in the workbook and they might want to do something else, go for gold.
If you're showing a top 10 leaderboard, table definitely has its place, and some visual context to it. So whether that be, your rank status with both colour and arrows.
Absolutely. Are there any other charts that we haven't spoken about that need some airtime?
The spider chart.
Really? Because when I think of spider charts, where I've seen them work really well is when you're doing some kind of psychometric profile of an individual and really understanding where their strengths really lie and perhaps where they've got deficiencies as well. So around openness or agreeableness, all that kind of thing can be really interesting to see marked out onto a spider chart. But thinking about the complexity across multiple people or multiple dimensions, I feel like I would be overwhelmed if there were lots of them on the page.
A bar chart will tell you the same story, and for me it's a lot cleaner and clearer. Having the circular side of it gives that unnecessary bias to potentially the top of the spider chart compared to the lower.
Yeah, interesting point, because I hadn't really thought about also the connections between them. Are we really connecting neuroticism to openness? Like they're two distinct categories as well. So take your point.
Maybe someone can show us a good example of a spider where it does work. I'm sure they're out there.
Absolutely.
What about box and whisker?
I think a box and whisker and showing the jitters of where all the points are can be really fascinating, but that's just more the data person in me. So I don't think that I would do that for a large audience. Great for in-depth analysis.
So Fee, something that we bang on about so much, and it should have been right up at the front. Why does this matter?
Why do great visualizations matter? Well, it helps people to see patterns, trends, and insights quickly. That makes it really actionable for end users. So I believe that my role as a data professional is to really solve the problems up front or highlight problems quickly so that people can adjust and make better decisions. The types of designs that I look to do avoid that sort of cognitive overload and helps people to be able to intuitively understand what's happening. So if you don't have a great visualization, it can be misleading. Some of the ways that it can be misleading, for instance, are if you cut the axes for a bar chart. Doesn't matter if you cut the y-axis for a line chart, but it does for a bar chart. We've talked about the pie chart difficulties and understanding things. So understanding what a great visualization is can really help people to make better decisions. And even though there's been a lot of progress in AI recently, where more tools are able to query data through natural language, a data visualization that's pre-prepared, that everyone's using the same way of calculating things, it gives that standardized measure of what's happening that everyone can benchmark against and rally towards.
I love how you've summarized having everyone on the same page and looking at the same definition of metric, because that's another big piece. A great visualization should have that consistency. A great data visualization allows the user not just to ask the first question, but be able to dig deeper into why that's happening.
I agree. What are some quick wins that you think people could get for instantly better visualizations?
Look how many colors they've got on the page and try and get it down to 4 or less. Increase their white space, get their typography right. Get rid of those thick, ugly axis lines. Make sure their bar chart always starts at a 0.
Yes.
Tidy up their tooltips. Don't use the standard format that comes, especially from Tableau. I like sentence tooltips. Make sure your legends are clear, that people understand what each color represents. If you've got any interactions on the dashboard, highlight those. Use some Unicode. Make sure your filters are consistent. There's somewhere that people know where to find them, particularly if you're hiding them. I love what you were talking about earlier around peer review. We can get so deep in our own data visualization. We're not allowing them to stand on their own. So get someone from outside your immediate space to have a look in and ask how they understand it and how they interpret the data.
Great ideas there. I think just leaning into a few things, you mentioned reducing unnecessary axis lines, reducing chart junk in general is really important. Do you really need certain things on there? Are you double encoding without intention? Remove all of that. I like your point around tooltips, turning off the tooltip menu as well so that you can't click on it and you get that awful pop-up, making sure that things are balanced as well. So sometimes different charts can get out of balance, and so using padding there can really help improve the alignment. Do you believe it's important to tell the story?
I want to say yes and no. You've got to go back into your audience. And I feel that some of the visualizations that are out there are more in the infographic space. So you've got to understand your audience. Is this a marketing piece that needs a lot more contextual information? Or is it a data visualization that people are coming in to look at every day and they need less information?
Right, so exploratory and explanatory.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that a story is always necessary. And in fact, it's impossible to tell a story if you've got data that is regularly updating. The story might change. You can't hard code that story into the visualization as well, but helping, like you said, add some of those tooltips that annotate where things are can help. I believe that you can let the dashboard tell its own story by using pre-attentive attributes like color effectively, where you're drawing the insights up so they really almost smack people in the face when they get to see them, in a nice way, of course.
Another way to tell a clear story is to make sure the data flows. Don't start with your big ass numbers at the top and then get into the weeds in the very first chart. Make sure you're telling the story with your data as you go down the page.
100%. And I think that the most important stuff, even then if they're not banned, should be the stuff at the top, because the dropout rate as you start to go down, particularly in a long form, can be a lot. So you've got to make sure that you're capturing the attention right up front, and that TikTokification of the way that our brains actually work. Keep that attention in there.
What's your thought, Fee, on long form versus slide form visualizations?
I prefer long form. I would say preference. I don't think that it's grounded in any research that I've seen or read, but for me, going top to bottom, it's really easy. How about you?
I agree. I do prefer long form as well, and that allows you not to be restricted by how much of a story you can tell.
People are less likely to click and go to the next dashboard. I do know from looking at adoption stats that people are less likely to keep going along to the right or in the tabs. So by having it in long form, it can reduce that. The only issue with that is if people want to print.
Yes, the threaded PDF where dashboard goes to delay.
Any other things that you would like to raise? Because I do have one more section that I did prepare something for.
Come on, challenge us. Let's go.
Quick fire round.
Ah, payback.
Oh, I think that mine's maybe more like focused on the topic, but we'll see. All right, are you ready for your quick fire round? One color to rule them all. What's your go-to highlight color?
Oh, it really depends on the company. So I like to lean into their color, but today I'm thinking teal blue.
Interesting. I've had teal blue as a color in a previous organization, but our DUBBED colors, we have our highlight alert, which is a hot pink color, and our highlight insights, which is a bright purple color. If you could ban one chart type forever, what would it be?
Oh, definitely the pie chart.
Oh,
What would you ban?
I think chart type map, because it's not a chart, it's a diagram. What's more powerful, a good headline or a good legend?
Oh, good headline.
Interesting.
It's the first thing. It's like, it's the hook.
The reason why I was surprised, we didn't really talk about headlines or titles, we didn't really say that. So interesting to hear that come out. Mm-hmm. First thing to check when a visualization isn't resonating.
The padding. That's one of the first things that comes to me. It's not balanced.
To me, the first thing that I check when something's not resonating is the requirements. Like, why am I doing this? What's my purpose behind it? That's the thing that stands out.
Yeah.
What's the most overrated data viz trend right now?
Chucking a whole lot of AI in it and overcomplicating everything.
Interesting. Have you had a favorite data storytelling example?
Oh, I love the old Andy Cotgrave one where he talks about the deaths in Iraq.
Good one. I love that, because you think it's one thing and then he just flicks the switch on you and puts it a different way. And it really shows the power of what a visualization and how you position the visualization can actually do to the end story. I also love Hans Rosling's one because obviously he gets so excited and talks like he's at the Melbourne Cup almost about what's happening with everything, and that you just can't help but get drawn in. The other person that comes to mind around great storytelling is Cole Nussbaumer Naflet. If you're starting out in data viz, really great book, Storytelling with Data, because it's super accessible. I managed to read it in under a day. It's written for anyone to understand, not just data visualization people. And it will tell you all the things that you can do to get rid of chart junk. And she just, on point, brings the storytelling and weaves it through. So it's really great.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go to her workshop a couple of years ago and meet her in person, which was amazing. And it's a book that I've bought often for my team.
Okay, last question. Describe a great data visualization in one word.
Beautiful. So, B, that concludes podcast number 8. It's in the bag on what makes a great data visualization. You'll see Fee and I have been wearing our glow up shirts, and you may be thinking, what is a glow up? Well, a glow up is where you can come, reach out to us, give us your visualization in whatever format that you've got that you're not happy with, and we will come in and glow it up for you.
Yeah, fab. I can't wait to be doing some more of those glow ups and getting people onto the right track so that they can have beautiful designs that are showing the insights as well. I feel like this session's been really great, but it's been a bit like a waffle chart.
So funny.
But which was one chart we didn't talk about, but I have really enjoyed this conversation. Take care.
We're undubbed. Bye.
Oh, don't forget, like and subscribe and give us a review.
Yes, we want reviews. Good or bad.